The encounter with the shadow deprives a person of their illusions, and it was illusions that gave them the strength to live. Have you ever felt like disappearing? Not because you want to die, but because you no longer know who you are. Have you ever looked at your life, your habits, desires, and goals, and had the strange feeling that everything was built by someone you no longer recognize? You have wondered why, after so much healing and so much courage to face the shadow, the world seems to have lost its color. Carl Jung wrote, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." And perhaps you are right there, in the limbo between what died and what has not yet been born. You faced your shadow, dove into the darkest part of yourself. You cried over forgotten traumas. You forgave the unforgivable. You let fall masks you had worn for decades. You imagined that light, clarity, and enthusiasm would come after, but the only thing that arrived was silence. It is not sadness. It is not depression. It is a kind of sophisticated existential emptiness, as if the engine that once drove you, that force that made you run, produce, and fight, had simply stopped working. The truth is, maybe it did. Jung discovered that most people, upon completing a deep process of shadow integration, enter a kind of psychic death, a dissolution of what he called the persona, the social mask we use to survive, to please, to conquer, to hide. You are not unmotivated. You simply no longer need to pretend you want everything you were taught to want. This video is not about productivity, not about how to become who you were before, because perhaps you should not go back to who you were. This video is for those who are in the desert after the storm, for those who thought healing meant living better and discovered that, in truth, it meant beginning to die to everything that was never real. If you are tired of pretending you care about what does not matter, if everything seems to lose meaning and you can no longer find reasons to keep up that old social dance, then maybe you are exactly where you should be. You are not broken. You are in the sacred interval between the persona and the self, between the actor and the author, between control and surrender. And it is in that space we are going to walk together today. We will explore not how to get motivated again, but what it means to live when all your old motivation no longer serves you. We will look at that lack of will not as an error, but as a portal. Because sometimes when everything in you goes quiet, that is exactly where the true self begins to whisper. You imagine that healing would let you live like before, but no one warned you that true healing does not hand you back your old life. It tears you out of it. And what remains is that strange, almost uncomfortable silence, that apathy that does not fit the glossy aesthetic of triumph, that lack of motivation that does not match the happy ending you expected. But what if that emptiness were precisely the proof that something deep has finally happened? Carl Jung, perhaps more than any other modern thinker, understood the price of integration. For him, healing was not feeling good. It was feeling what we never wanted to feel. It was realizing that much of what moved us was nothing but well-disguised fear. Have you considered that? That your urge to win, to produce, to be useful perhaps, was born from the panic of being rejected? That your self-care was only an elegant attempt to hide the disgust you felt for yourself? That even your spirituality was at times just an escape, ritual? It is not easy to face. That is why we call it shadow work, because it demands that you enter the darkest room of your soul and turn on the light. And in doing so, you discover something devastating. Much of your motivation was artificial. The persona, that character you learned to play to survive, drove you with brutal efficiency. It told you, work more or they will call you useless. Be pleasant or they will abandon you. Be strong or they will destroy you. And you obeyed so well that one day you forgot it was only a mask, until the collapse arrived. And the collapse was you. You faced traumas, recognized wounds, cried on your knees, were brave. But what no one told you is that by integrating your shadow, you also dismantle the motivational system that kept you functional. Functional for others, productive for the system, well-behaved for society, but not authentic for yourself. And then one ordinary day you wake up and something has changed. You no longer want to chase approval. You no longer feel pleasure in competing. You no longer see meaning in pleasing. You look around and everything seems like a grand stage set, and you no longer know your role. That is the side effect of awareness. It frees you, but it also isolates you. Jung wrote, "The integration of the shadow disorganizes the system of desires. For what was once repressed becomes part of consciousness, and what motivated you loses its meaning." That is why you feel that absence. It is not failure. It is a structural reformulation of the self. You did not lose motivation. You lost the charade that motivated you. Look, much of what you called willpower was often just made-up anxiety, fear dressed as purpose. It was an agitation that, not knowing how to name, you called ambition. But now, after facing your shadow, you no longer feel the need to prove anything to anyone. You simply do not feel. And this is where many people get lost, because we were trained to believe motivation is a sign of health. But Jung discovered that there is a moment on the path of individuation where the absence of motivation is a symptom of healing. Think of the caterpillar. It lives crawling. One day it feels the impulse to withdraw, and inside the cocoon it dissolves. It literally becomes an amorphous liquid. No part of the caterpillar survives. It is in that confused, shapeless, chaotic state that the butterfly begins to form. What you are feeling now is that stage, the dissolution, the death of the caterpillar, but we are not taught to deal with that stage. In a culture of performance, everything must have purpose, clarity, productivity. Emptiness looks like weakness. Pausing looks like laziness. Introspection looks like a waste of time. Jung went against all of that. He defended silence, withdrawal, the deep listening of the unconscious. During the years I pursued my inner images, I seemed unproductive to the world, but it was there that everything essential in me was decided. Maybe it is time to allow yourself that same silence, to stop trying to become who you were before, because the before was contaminated, tied to desires that were not yours. You are not in crisis, you are in transition. The problem is that this transition has no name, no script, no guarantees, only one certainty. What once made sense no longer does, and that is okay. Breathe with that. Do not try to fix it. Do not try to swap your old motivation for a new goal. Let that space exist, because as Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that privilege demands that you unlearn everything you believed you were. So if today you woke up without motivation, if you looked at your to-do list and nothing there seems to matter, if you sat on the edge of the bed with a knot in your throat and a hollow in your chest, feel that. Not as a problem to solve, but as a portal to cross. You are not going backward. You are shedding. You are letting fall the clothes of the persona, the goals that were not yours, the guilt that was not yours, the urgency that came from fear. And maybe for the first time in your life, you are drawing closer to what truly matters. But the real does not shout, does not press, does not threaten. The real whispers, and to hear it, you must stay quiet. Now tell me something. Have you ever felt that you give too much and still are not respected? It is not for lack of effort. It is because respect is not requested, it is projected. And that projection begins with how you train your mind to keep cool and focused in critical situations. Many grew up with the idea of being good, being understanding, but that does not form strong men. It forms people who are easily manipulated. There is a model of mental self-control being used by those who decided to stop pleasing and start imposing themselves with presence. We recorded a video explaining how that structure works in real life. To access it, scan the code on screen or click the link in the description or the first pinned comment. There is a kind of tiredness that rest does not cure. It is a deep weariness, not of the body but of the soul, that appears when you can no longer uphold the persona you became. You wake up, look at your routine, your commitments, your image on social media, your relationships, and you feel as if you are performing a role that has lost its meaning, as if your life had become a play where you no longer remember your lines. Or, worse, you remember them but no longer believe them. That is not an identity crisis. It is the collapse of the persona. Carl Jung coined the term persona to describe that social mask we all use to function in the world. It is not a mistake. In truth, it is an adaptive structure. But the problem begins when we forget it is a mask, when we confuse the role with the actor. The persona is that which someone is not, but which they themselves and others think they are. Carl Jung. From childhood, we learn to act. Be nice, be smart, be strong, be funny, be productive. Those silent mandates mold our gestures, our decisions, our ambitions, and little by little we become what is expected of us instead of what we really are. The persona helped you survive. Yes, it helped you be accepted, praised, recognized, but it also made you forget fundamental parts of yourself. You repressed your vulnerability to look invincible. You hid your sensitivity to avoid seeming weak. You smothered your rightful rage to be loved, and now you are tired. But that tiredness is sacred because it is the first symptom of the collapse. At first, it looks like simple lack of motivation, then a misalignment, then a quiet anguish, a mute scream from someone who feels suffocated inside themselves. You try to become who you were before, but you cannot. You try to get excited about what used to move you, but everything feels dead inside. Then something in you starts to give way. The cracks in the mask widen. The automatic lines no longer roll out naturally. The laughter feels rehearsed. Life feels decorated. That is when the collapse arrives. But it is not destruction, it is liberation. It is the fall of that self built to please, to avoid abandonment, to secure a safe place in the world, but which deep down was only fear in disguise. Jung knew this. He lived it. After the break with Freud, Jung entered a period of isolation and fragmentation. He abandoned status, titles, inherited concepts. He allowed his persona as a respectable scientist to crumble, and in that abyss, he found his truth. He wrote, "My true self was waiting for me at the bottom of the chaos." Do you grasp the weight of that? It is necessary to allow chaos. It is necessary to let the disguise fall, even if it protected you your whole life. The collapse of the persona is not pleasant. It can bring anxiety attacks, a sense of failure, isolation, outside judgment. People around you may not understand. After all, you were so centered, so strong, so successful, and now you seem lost. But the truth is, you are finally finding yourself. The old self that made you run is no longer in charge. That motivation based on pleasing, proving, reciprocating has died. The space left over is strange because at first it is only that, space. But later it becomes fertile ground. To reach that, though, you must endure the discomfort of nakedness. Jung said this process is like an initiation. Becoming conscious is a painful process. It implies passing through shadowy zones and accepting the collapse of old structures. That means your current pain is evidence of birth. The collapse of the persona is the moment when the ego begins to cede place to the self. It is no longer about managing the image, but about listening to the essence. And the essence is not in a hurry, does not seek likes, has no career plan. It simply is. Right now, you may feel as if you are wandering aimlessly, but that is precisely because the old map no longer works. You are not lost. You are off script, and off script is where the true plot begins. Maybe now you feel like someone who forgot how to live, but in reality, you are relearning to live without pretending. You are learning to say no without guilt, to rest without justifying, to desire without shame, to exist without having to earn it all the time. The world will try to pull you back. It will try to glue the pieces of your old persona. It will offer applause, promises, distractions. But now you know, Those gleams are hooks, and you have already seen what is behind the stage. So let the collapse come. Let the script break. Let the mask melt. Only then will you finally be able to live from the inside out. We live in a world where silence is uncomfortable, where pausing is seen as weakness, where those who do not rush are left behind. But there are moments in life when running is betrayal. Betrayal of oneself, of one's rhythms, of the delicacy of what is trying to be born. Have you felt that? That subtle anxiety that you must find yourself soon, fix yourself, climb out of the hole, get back to normal. As if an invisible timer were lodged in your chest, and every second of apathy were accumulating guilt. Here is a truth few dare to say. The attempt to force motivation may be exactly what keeps you from finding it again. Jung knew this. He understood that after shadow integration, the psyche enters a state of quiet reorganization, a reconfiguration of being. Forcing action at that moment is like opening the cocoon before the butterfly is ready. The soul's growth does not follow the mind's timing. It blossoms according to the timing of the unconscious. Carl Jung. But the ego is impatient. It wants to fix, to fill, to accelerate. It is frightened by emptiness. It confuses pausing with regression and turns silence into a threat. Only the unconscious does not move under pressure. It responds to listening, and listening requires time, presence, waiting. Jung called this state confrontation with the unconscious. During that process, he himself spent 6 years apparently unproductive. He was ridiculed by colleagues, criticized by the scientific community, isolated in his own experience. Yet it was in that space, without goals, without direction, without performance, that his greatest revelations were born. Not through forced will, but through active imagination, through surrender to the unknown. Today we call it stagnation. He called it fertilization. Do you feel stuck without will, without plans, without goals? Perhaps you are simply allowing the inner soil to breathe. Imagine land that has been plowed too much, exploited too much, planted too much. It needs a period of rest, what farmers call fallow, to regenerate. What if your soul were lying fallow now? What if that absence of motivation were a sacred period of fertilization? But then comes the question, how long will I wait? Here's the hardest point of all. You do not decide when the new motivation arrives. It does not answer to logic, does not appear on spreadsheets, does not obey quarterly targets. It simply emerges as a will to walk, an idea that insists on returning, a piece of music that moves you for no reason, a gesture you make without thinking that suddenly makes sense. But it only emerges when it finds space. If that space is taken up by anxiety, self-demand, and forced efforts to fit back in, it moves away. Jung wrote, "The soul that waits in silence attracts invisible forces." Perhaps that is your task now. Not producing, not deciding, not reacting, but waiting with dignity. Waiting like someone who knows they are being gestated by something. Waiting like someone who breathes the invisible. Waiting like someone who trusts there is movement even in stillness. But careful, waiting is not passivity, it is listening. It asks you to pay attention to small inner pulses, to signals, to subtle resonances. It invites you to leave the logic of doing in order to be, and enter the truth of being in order to then do. That is revolutionary. Have you noticed how everything around you demands that you hurry? Culture, algorithms, coaches, well-intentioned advice, all shout, react, chase it, give your best. But what if the best of you now were to stay in silence? What if what your soul needs is not more noise, but more depth? It may seem the world will swallow you in that silence, that you will be left behind. Here is another uncomfortable truth. Perhaps it is precisely by staying behind that you finally find your path. Because your path is not the masses' path, not the hasty path, not the persona's path of survival, but the emerging self's. Waiting is therefore an act of courage because it challenges everything you were taught about worth. Here is a simple, deep exercise inspired by Jung's practices. For an entire week, change the question, what do I need to do today, to what is trying to emerge through me? That simple shift of focus may be the opening your soul was waiting for. Remember, you are not stuck. You are being prepared silently, deeply, mysteriously. And when that new motivation arrives, it will not come as a shout, but as a whisper that makes your whole body say yes. After the pain comes silence. After the silence comes emptiness. And in that emptiness, where there is no more rush, where the mask has already fallen, where the old ground has crumbled, something begins, slow, shy, almost formless, to breathe inside you. Maybe you will not notice it at first. The mind still looks for that explosive motivation, that old hunger, that fierce drive that pushed you to run, but it does not come. And that is good, because what is coming now is not a will pushed by fear, not a desire to fit in, not a movement to prove anything. What is being born is the real, and the real walks. Carl Jung called this self-motivated existence, a way of living where actions no longer arise from a compensation system, but from an authentic listening to the soul. What once was effort becomes flow. What once was demand becomes a calling. But how do you recognize this birth? The new will does not come as adrenaline. It will not bring that euphoric enthusiasm we so often confuse with passion. It will come with lightness, with quiet, with inner coherence. It may appear in a simple gesture like the urge to walk aimlessly, or the desire to paint again after years, or an idea that seems silly but gives you peace. At first you will find that peace strange because you were used to running to become someone, and now you are simply someone who is already whole. This new kind of will does not drain, it sustains. You might work all day and end with more energy than you started. You might talk with someone and feel nourished instead of depleted. You might do something simple and notice that it gives something back to you. That is the sign. What comes from the self does not demand validation. It is grounded in experience. That is why many people, upon entering this state, begin changing their lives. They change professions, social circles, homes, not on impulse but out of congruence, because now nothing that does not resonate with the real is tolerable. Jung observed that the self is centered but not rigid. It expresses itself through what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension of opposites until a third path appears, a path the ego could never invent on its own. That is what happens. Suddenly you start wanting to be alive, but not like before, not to impress, not to achieve, but to live what only you can live. The old motivation said, win. The new one says, remain. The old one said, prove. The new one says, feel. The old one shouted, you need to be someone. The new one whispers, you already are. And here a paradox arises. The more you surrender to that inner rhythm, the more outer things begin to align. Coincidences become synchronicities. Conversations gain depth. Decisions seem to arise from within, not from rational analysis, but from the quiet congruence of someone who finally knows what they want, because they allowed themselves not to want for a while. This will that is being born in you may be small now, uncertain, but trust it. It did not come from the persona. It came from the fertile darkness of your soul. It survived the collapse, the dissolution, the waiting, the fear. It is your return, but not to who you were, to who you are, without decorations, without performances, without burdens. And perhaps this is the true miracle, not regaining motivation, but discovering one that was never borrowed. Jung said, the journey is not outward, it is a return inward, a reconnection with what is essential. If you have come this far, it is because something in you has already begun to return. Return home, return to yourself. And when that will appears, that new will that is born without effort, without haste, without ego, you will not want to run, you will want to stay. Stay within yourself, stay present in the world, stay in your truth. And finally act not from fear of dying, but from the desire to live. There is no glorious ending in self-knowledge. There are no fireworks or triumphant music playing in the background. What exists, most of the time, is the muffled sound of a tired breath and a heart that, for the first time in a long time, no longer needs to race. After all that immersion in shadow and absence, in collapse, in waiting, what remains is not a new version of you. It is a version without masks, less performative, more honest, more strangely whole. You started this path perhaps wanting to find your motivation again. You wanted to feel desire again. But what you found was something deeper. The realization that much of what you called motivation was, in truth, well-disguised compulsion, pain dressed up as ambition, fear clothed as effort. The persona fell, the false will died, and in the middle of the apparent stagnation, a space was born. A sacred space where you no longer need to prove, run, act. A space where will can finally be born from within and not from the world's demands. But that new will does not shout, it whispers. It does not demand goals or grandeur. It invites with lightness, with truth. And that is the most frightening and liberating thing of all. That you can live moved by something other than lack. That you can rest without being in crisis. That you can desire without guilt. That you can live without always explaining yourself. Jung reminds us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he also warned that this privilege comes with farewells of the old self, of old wills, of old armor. So if today you feel something in you has died, perhaps it is because something new is finally ready to be born. And if it has not yet been born, that is okay. Wait with reverence. You are already on the path. And perhaps that is the true motivation, the courage to remain with yourself even when there is nothing left to show. Thank you for staying to the end. Truly, in this world where everything is rushed, superficial, where we barely give ourselves time to feel anything before jumping to the next thing, you chose to remain. To remain in a hard conversation, in an uncomfortable topic, in a journey that offers no easy answers. That is not a small thing. I do not know where you are now. Whether you are in the silence of your room with the phone in your hand and thoughts too loud to sleep, or listening in the middle of chaos, trying to hold on to some truth while the world insists you must react. I only know you made it here because something in you refused to accept that being lost is the same as being wrong. And if I can share something personal, this video exists only because one day I too found myself without ground. It was on an ordinary Sunday, one of those quiet ones where everything outside seemed normal, but inside nothing fit. I sat on the couch, looked around my own house, and had the strange feeling of being in a place that did not belong to me. Nothing there, not the furniture, not the books, not the dreams, felt mine. And I asked myself, what happens when the person you were for so long simply stops existing? The answer did not arrive right away. In fact, what arrived was emptiness, and I resisted it with all my strength. I read books, booked therapy sessions, tried to force myself back into old goals, made lists, built plans, set alarms. Nothing made sense. Only when I finally stopped trying to become who I had been did things quietly begin to rearrange. The first thing to arise was the will to write, but not about productivity, success, habits, or strategies. It was the need to write for those who, like me, were tired of pretending to be strong, who can no longer stand pretending to want what they never truly wanted. You, the person I imagined while writing every line of this script. Someone who has tried everything, who has walked the right path and still found themselves in the dark and had the courage not to run. That is why I thank you. Not for watching, not for giving a like, but for existing honestly, for holding the emptiness, for choosing to stay even when everything told you to run. You are part of a small, quiet minority, people who no longer want to live on autopilot, who no longer want to sell their soul for applause, people who chose the discomfort of truth over the comfort of a lie. And honestly, that is the kind of person I want to walk with. So thank you for being here, for letting me speak with you on this symbolic night, because every immersion in the unconscious happens at night, even if outside it is day. Thank you for not tapping next just because you felt uncomfortable. Thank you for feeling. If what you found here touched something in you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel.